everybody. My name is Charles Klein. I'm one of the librarians here at the Crozer Library. We are thrilled to welcome Yusef Miller back to Chester for this presentation. Allow me a brief introduction and I will turn it over. For those of you who don't know, I was born and raised in Chester, graduated of Chester High in '87. Served in the Navy, has retired out west, and is now doing research on the Underground Railroad in Chester. We are all familiar with the fact that the Underground Railroad was in and around Chester, and here, given that we're on the Mason-Dixon line. But specifically, what was happening and where was it happening, that's something that I know many of us, even those of us who've read history, are less familiar with. So we're thrilled to learn a little bit more tonight. I thought, before we got started, just a little bit of context, in that everybody, those of us who grew up in the United States, especially at a certain age, we think of slavery, and we think of Gone with the Wind, we think of the American South, which is certainly the truth. But there was slavery here in Delaware County, and starting as early, William Penn, who landed here in 1682, is quoted as saying that, quote, for instance, that slaves were more valuable and lasting than endangered white servants. And that's William Penn. To give you a sense, I'm quoting from a book here which was published in 1884. To give you a sense of what we're talking about, in Delaware County, in the census in 1790, showed 50 slaves. And understand this is a very small population compared to today. There were 7 in 1810, 1 in 1820, and 2 in 1830. And of course the Civil War was 20 years roughly later. And interesting, and this book was published in 1884, and it talks about, quote, the old colonial law, which authorized the apprehension and imprisonment of Negro or white persons suspected of being runaway slaves or servants, was continued in practice until the beginning of this century, so until the beginning of the 1800s. So that, I think, really puts into context what we're talking about with the Underground Railroad. So without further ado.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. And as was said, my name is Yusef Miller, and I was born and raised right here in Chester, Pennsylvania, right in the LV, and then I went over to stay with my father on 15th Street, graduated from high school in 1987, joined the military, went into the Navy, served 24 years active duty service as a combat medic, with service in Iraq and Afghanistan. When I retired in 2011, I stayed on the West Coast, so actually I'm visiting. I come here for certain occasions and family occasions, and it just so happened that the planning of this event coincides with my mother's birthday. So it's my mother's birthday today. I saw her before I came here. I got her blessings before I came here. She can't make it here. I got her blessings before I came here. And I would like to be sort of traditional and acknowledge one of our scholars that is here today, Twyla Simpkins, who is here. She's a scholar and a colleague of local history. Also a new friend that I just met with on Darby history, Harold. And he's here as well. Also Reggie, the people that I've been working with, also from the meeting house. We have people here from the Chester meeting. So with that being said, this talk is dedicated to the people of Chester. Past, present, and future. We need to know what's happening with Chester. As an introduction, when we talk about Underground Railroad in this area, Wilmington, Delaware, Chester County, we go over to Philadelphia. All of that just surrounds Chester, and Chester is this blank spot in Underground Railroad history. And I said to myself, that's impossible. That is impossible. It is a natural route, it is a simple route, and it is a route that makes sense. So why isn't it there? I honestly don't think that it was a nefarious idea, that they said, let's just wipe Chester off the map. It wasn't that kind of idea. But I think what happened is the secrecy of the Underground Railroad was so important that Chester probably did it better than most. So I just tell you a sort of attitude that happened with Chester. And at this time, there wasn't a lot of African Americans, I would like to say at this point, people of African descent. There wasn't a lot of people of African descent in the area, but there were some escaped slaves from the South. It was about a dozen of them. And they're running from 10 enslavers. And when they reached Chester, they turned around and just beat them up. Those dozen turned on them and beat them back to South. And that sort of sets the tempo in my mind for Chester. Self-defense, don't take no crap, that kind of thing when it comes to Chester. And hopefully, with a topic like this, we can take that energy, instead of turning it inward to a self-destructive way, turn it outward to improve Chester, to increase the pride of Chester. Because I'm all about see pride, I really am. I don't live here anymore, but see pride all day. You know, we come up here, a lot of us are born and raised in Chester, and those who are not born and raised in Chester live in Chester. We care about Chester. We care about the Chester youth. And the Chester youth need to know that Chester was a very, very important place, and it is still in my heart. I'd also like to thank and honor Charles Bloxon. Charles Bloxon, we just lost recently. He is the namesake of the Bloxon Library in Philadelphia and Temple University. I was trying to get a hold of him to ask him a question because the story I just mentioned is in his book on the history of Pennsylvania and the Underground Railroad, and it was just a sentence. No fault of his own. It was just a sentence. The whole topic of Chester was a paragraph. The topic of slavery, a sentence. So it is no fault that people don't know. You just have to dig. And the reason why I dig, I love Chester. People will read over documents and see Philadelphia and see Delaware. They'll see Chester and gloss over it. So I think the reason why I got so far is that I have a passion for Chester. And I notice Chester when I see it. So with that, let's get started. The situation here in Chester. We know William Penn landed here, and he landed here in the 1600s, 1682 to be exact. And at that time, as was said earlier, there was slavery here. And the reigning and prevailing religious group were the Quakers. They were the reigning prevailing group until they, when people started immigrating, they became less of the prevailing group. The Protestant did, but at the time, they had a lot of power here in the Delaware County, and particularly in the Chester meeting, which is an early meeting, and that meeting was in our earliest building, the Chester Courthouse. And that Chester Courthouse doubled as the first Chester meeting place. That place, of course, I think everyone in here knows, it's what we call Overtown. Right? It is Overtown, you know exactly where it is. On Market Street, you know where it is and what it looks like. And this is going to be important. This is going to be important to the rest of the discussion. This discussion is not about Quakers. This discussion is not about anything but the black experience in this situation. So we say that proudly and boldly, that we want to know what was going on with African Americans at that time. And our allies, of course, but the focus is on African Americans. The Underground Railroad activity started really from the beginning of this nation. When people of African descent landed here, they escaped readily. And the reason why our indigenous brothers and sisters won the immunities to European diseases, but the reason why it was harder for people of African descent to escape, they don't know the landscape. If I was imprisoned here in Chester, but you could let me go, I'm not coming back. I know Chester, I know the LV, I know the Bennett, I know the Fairgrounds, I know Wilmington Ridge, I know all these places. I will not come back. I know where to go. This is what the situation was with the indigenous. William Penn, as was said earlier in the introduction, he used actually enslaved people, and he commissioned a ship to come here, and he used slaves as he was here. So yes, slavery was here, not very prominent as an area, but yes, it was here. And as we were discussing earlier before we started, one of the local scholars, we were talking about Barbados. And Barbados was a a money-making powerhouse. They were Quakers as well. And those Quakers, and these Quakers, they had a relationship, of course, as Quakers do. But Barbados was one of the last holdouts for ending slavery. The Quakers decided that slavery is inconsistent with their spiritual practices, and they should end slavery. And they did. And those Quakers who practiced slavery, what was called read out of the meeting. And read out is like a word like to be excommunicated. You can't use the services, you can't be a part of them anymore, and they don't recognize you as a Quaker. But what started this route? Where did I get started in this route? It was with a Quaker. It was a Quaker who was from Derby, but moved to Wilmington. And he was a powerhouse. His name was Thomas Garrett Jr., and he is very famous for providing routes. Even Harriet Tubman, he was friends with Harriet Tubman, providing routes for African Americans to go to Westchester, to go to York, Pennsylvania, to get to Philadelphia. But what about Chester? I found a document where he was speaking about Chester, and he said to another powerhouse of emancipation and abolition of slavery, William Still. William Still is an African American in Philadelphia. Powerhouse, born into an enslaved family. They escaped from, I'm blanking right now where they escaped from, but they wound up in New Jersey. And in New Jersey, I think it was Maryland that they came from. In Maryland, their family was still classified as slaves when he was born, but in New Jersey, it wasn't. So it's kind of like, was he a slave, was he not a slave? Okay, that was just out there. So here's William Still. William Still, very industrious, very powerhouse in connections, and when African Americans came his way, he documented. So when you find books about William Still, you'll find the narratives of people who escaped from South to Philadelphia. So this powerhouse, one powerhouse, the Quaker, Thomas Garrett, he writes to William Still, powerhouse to powerhouse. In the middle is Chester. And he says, in one of his 1858 narratives, he says, I'm sending your way some enslaved people, and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm sending them by boat to Chester so that they can go to the camps in Media. I'm sending them to Chester. So therefore, where would they go if they're coming to Chester? By boat. They would go right over there on Market Street, the Market Street Wharf. That would be the most logical place. Now, while I say that, I'll also mention that we had other wharfs as well, but this one is the most logical. Why is it the most logical? Back to our Quaker friends. They're right there on that main path. But they're not the only ones on the path. Who else is on the path? We have a church, a black church. And this church, Union AME. Union AME was founded by Robert Morris, an escaped slave, and he became a pastor, and he opened that right on Welsh Street. Welsh Street is just a block over. So here we have the Quaker meeting. Here we have a church from an ex-slave, right here. So we have two stations, and we're going to keep on going. He said, William Garrett, he also said in another letter, also in 1858, I am sending some enslaved people, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm sending enslaved people by car. What he meant is rail car, the railway. I'm sending people by car to Chester. And he's telling William Still about this. He's writing to William Still. And they come to Chester. So where would they come in Chester in 1858? They will come actually to Edgemont. That was where the first train station was. The one we have now is later. The one that was at Edgemont is no longer there. But we need to recognize and mark that spot as a stop on the Underground Railroad, because that was a station that they used. Now, in your mind, I know you can picture, I'm so sorry I don't have the images for you, but next time I have this, and there will be more information, and I will do it pictorially. So, Chester, Market Street, you have the Meeting House, you have Welsh Street, Union AME, and straight down that road is Edgemont Avenue train station. Why is this road so straight? Why is this road so straight? And before we get to Edgemont, the Overtown businesses all have underground cabins. And now we know that the Underground Railroad, in most cases, was neither underground or a railroad. But Chester, Pennsylvania, it was a railroad. It was actually a railroad and a stagecoach, and by foot and by boat. All these different accesses because Chester was an obvious hub. So now we have all of these links, and there'll be more that I'll speak about. All these links that right in the hub of Overtown, Chester, which I call Freedom Square. It's just the name I made up. So right in this square, we have Union AME, we have Chester Meeting, and we also have Asbury Church. Asbury Church, that was founded by, and at this time, Asbury Church was not where it is now. It was down there on, I believe it was Welsh as well, second of Welsh. And that was founded by a man, his name was Stephen Smith. Who was Stephen Smith? Who founded a church in Chester. Who is this Stephen Smith? He lived in Philadelphia. He was one of the wealthiest people in the nation. And he financed and built this church. So in my mind, he was up to something. He made it in Freedom Square as well. And he's an abolitionist, anti-slavery. Matter of fact, he was chased out of York, Pennsylvania, where he was. They burned down his buildings because he was helping slaves. And then he communicated with William Still, and he came to Philadelphia, and he's still up to his good, godly work. And this man built a church in Chester, right in Freedom Square. So these two African-American churches are there. I wanted to make sure I explained and stated that they were African-American churches because primary, the people we thank for our liberation is ourselves. First, number one. We freed ourselves, we escaped ourselves, and then we have allies along the way who should be appreciated. But the number one appreciation that we give for the emancipation and the abolition of black people is black people. So as we see this Freedom Square and this obvious route, I said, well, what's down this route? It seems like Chester in that hub is a beginning spot, and everything is moving to that route. The other Chester meeting house for the Orthodox is down that route, and they are Orthodox, which they didn't really, they weren't pro-slavery at all. They just wanted to focus more on spirituality. But I believe that this Chester meeting house was actually participating in the emancipation and abolition of slaves by their location and their locality. Along that route, we're still going out towards Media. We're going out towards that area. A lot of people believe that, what is it called, that nursing home?
Belvedere.
Belvedere. A lot of people believe, thank you, that Belvedere was a site on the Underground Railroad. And I went there, and I checked in the basements, and I went to the ceiling, and I loved it. I looked out, the lookout place, beautiful, beautiful, but coincidental. It was built too late. But where did this idea come from? The idea is valid, but the location is wrong. This is just in my research, my hypothesis. The location is wrong, but the idea is valid. Right down the road, my local navigator, my sister Samira, in the back there, she navigates while I'm looking out the window, checking all my sites and everything. And we go to the house that's there. This house is by the Sharpless family. And if you've never heard of the Sharpless were very influential and wealthy family throughout Delaware County. They owned acres and acres of land, very, very wealthy. There's a Sharpless house there. I was invited into that house by the owner. Go into the basement where there is a kitchen, an old kitchen made out of all these rocks and everything, and very nice. And then there's a door. There was a door and a tunnel about this high, about 3 feet. And it went back about 20 yards. And inside this tunnel, the sides are brick, the upper brick, and it's only 3 feet tall. What could you use it for? 20 feet back and 3 feet tall? We wonder. I'm looking at old maps to see if I can find maybe a well somewhere, maybe a barn, a shed somewhere, but I gotta look at old maps. And I've come across some maps that are really promising. So I'll look at that. Why am I saying this about the Sharpless house? This Sharpless house, which is only a mile away, is also along the creek, the Ridley Creek. It makes sense that if you're coming from Chester and you can't go by boat and you can't go by a car and they're over policing this area, so to speak, I would say at night, slip out, follow Chester Creek to Ridley Creek until you see whatever it is. We'll find out. I'll keep studying. And then that will lead you into this tunnel, crawl to the tunnel, knock on the door, and you'll go into the kitchen. This is my hypothesis of this area. So it is only 1 mile, not even a mile from Belvedere. So, as I said, I believe the stories and the rumors were correct. The location was wrong. Sharpless. Who is Sharpless? Sharpless, as I said, the whole family, their founding families of Delaware County. But Sharpless also has another quality, John Sharpless. He was a quarryman. They did quarries, and he hired black people. In 1848, I believe, there was an explosion. A huge boulder from the explosion heads towards a person of African descent, crushes his leg, smashes his leg to pieces. Sharpless puts him in a carriage, rushes him by horse and carriage to Philadelphia to the hospital to save his life. And they couldn't save his leg, of course. It was smashed, his boulder turned into mush. So now he has a peg leg. Why was Sharpless so interested in this African American? And his house is along the route. So it is very suspect to be a part of this Underground Railroad. Sharpless saved this man. And this man, what it's called in the newspaper, this is a primary source. The sources that I've been mentioning are primary sources, which means they were written in the day at the time that this happened. So, who is this man? His name was William Brown. I call him Willie Brown. Willie Brown was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. How do we know? There is a letter about him in Sharon Hill, which they used to call Sharon, only Sharon at the time. There's a letter about him that says this able African American who had he had one leg and a peg leg, and he was more able than people with 2 legs. And what they used to do with horse and carriage, they used to go to Sharon Hill, to the women's college, and take the runaways, and they would throw rocks at the windows. They know it was done, little stones. They would come out and let the women in. Let the men in. Anybody, even slaves in. And they said that William Brown, the one with the peg leg, was also assisted by an able Methodist black preacher. His name was Reverend Samuel Smith. Who was Reverend Samuel Smith? Reverend Samuel Smith was a pastor at Union A&E. So he was not only at a station, he was also a conductor. I need to find out more about his family and his whereabouts afterwards. The same with Mr. William Brown. But now you can see all of these names and all of these titles are coming out about Chester. Now, if we keep going down this road, what are we gonna find? What's down that road? Down the road is the Quakers of Media, where they were really, they had that place really locked in tight, and they could have enslaved people prosper there. A lot of people went to Media, and some went from Media to Philadelphia and beyond, and some just stayed in Media. In Media, there is a man, his name is Wessel Broadhead. He was a wealthy man, and he was a horse owner, and he had a stagecoach business. His stagecoach ran people from Media to Chester and back frequently, right along that road. And when he did that, that shows that it was a popular road and an easy access road to going from Chester to Media. So maybe, as we're looking into these documents, as the runaways held up under the businesses over town, at the meeting house, at Union AME, at Asbury, as they're holding up, they're waiting for stagecoaches to go to media, they're walking to media, they're doing all kinds of things going to media, because apparently it seems that Chester was very pleased. So it must have been really big business, really great route. When you go down, you keep going down into the media meeting house. We have the stagecoach in media. We also have families that were Quakers who not only helped people of African descent, but sold them lands so that they can start their businesses. These are our allies. Sold them lands and parcels of lands, and then they subdivided those lands so other Africans, when they came in, they could have lands. Who are these people? One, the family of the Van Leer family. The Van Leer is a very wealthy family, and they sold parcels of land to people of African descent. And some parcels they set aside only for people of African descent to buy. The Van Leer family. Also the Fox family. Now, the Van Leer and the Fox family, if you keep going into media, you're going to find that you end up in Lama. In Lama, they had a black community where they took, the Van Leers and the Foxes, they had these parcels of land, of a black community over there, and they founded and started a church. This black church was called Honeycomb Union AME. And it is one of those old churches and a sanctuary for people going in that route. So now we see all of these places that weren't mentioned before, and you put them in this logical puzzle piece, and you can see a route through Chester, through 291 if you can make it, and if not, you go down Edgemont Avenue. If not, you straight go down to Welsh. If not, you can go by Chester Creek, but you can get out of here if it's over police. If it's not over police, you can go straight to Philly. But these are the missing pieces of Chester, the missing names of Chester. Now, after slavery, the war ends. This is why I think Chester was so great at being secretive. And it took a while to get some of this information. It was so secretive because right after the war, 1865, the end of slavery, the 13th Amendment, and then we go into 1867, the 14th Amendment, 1870, the 15th Amendment, the three amendments after slavery amendment, 13, 14, 15. 13, end of slavery, physical bondage, except for incarceration. We know how that goes. Then, 14th Amendment, citizenship. 15th Amendment, the right for black males to vote, not our females. The right for black males to vote. These three things came out of the Civil War. But what else happened in 1870 in Chester? An explosion of black societies in Freedom Square. An explosion. One second, let me get to the page. I was just flowing, so sorry about that. Yes. When we're looking through the research in the old data books, when they come to secret societies and organizations, when they name them, if they're black, they put color. So this list was made in 1870. And listen to this: Eagle Lodge, 1870. The number of the lodge was 1878. Colored on 4th and Edward Street. Now we know Edwards is not over town; it's down. But just follow me on this. Radiant Star Lounge at Market Street, 5th and Market. Progressive Pilgrims, colored at the Chester Times building. Chester Times old page. Webster Lodge, colored at 3rd and West. I don't know what they mean by 3rd and West, but anyway, probably some of the names changed over time of these locations. Love and Charity Beneficial Society, colored at Union Hall, and that was on Market Street. and they met on the second and fourth Wednesday, and also on the first and third. Oh, they met every Wednesday. So Eastern Light Lounge, Color, and the Third Edward, Franklin Lounge, Fourth and Market, Mount Vernon, Edgemont, and then we go to the favorite thing that I'm very honored to speak about, and I thank my sisters and my aunties for being here. I want to talk about the Tent Sisters. The Tent Sisters blossomed at this time, and we had many tent societies or organizations here. So we had the Naomi Tent, the Beulah Tent, the Starling Tent, the Hannah Tent, the Queen Esther Tent, the Smith Tent, and the Valentine Tent. These are the Tent Sisters, and they met over town and on Flower Street. So when we talk about these great conductors, and we hear the names like William, and we hear Stephen, and also we need to make sure that we resurrect the memory of our beloved sisters and our aunties that were in the struggle. They didn't just pop up organized in 1870. I don't believe it, I don't accept it. I say that they were busy before slavery ended, and they were just great at keeping the lid on it. Why should black people keep a better lid than anyone else? Because if you're caught dealing and helping slaves, you become enslaved. They say, okay, you're guilty of helping slaves, you are now sold into slavery. And they did that with the risk of their own life and the risk of becoming slaves themselves. But our mothers take care of their children. So this is the look of Overtown. Why did they choose Market Street? Why did they choose, quote unquote, Freedom Square? Because that was a historical and cultural place of liberation that we forgot. Now, the last person that I want to speak about by name is a man from Chester. He was in Philadelphia first. He was a white doctor, and he's one of the first people at the Women's College that allowed women into the medical school in Philadelphia, and his name was Elwood Harvey. And this is very important for our city, the city of Chester. All of this is important for the city of Chester, right? That Freedom Square and that emancipation route by foot that we use every day on Market Street, Edgemont Avenue, and all of those. Every day. That is the route that our brothers and sisters travel. But here's something that's really important for the city of Chester. Right now, well, let me continue. Elwood Harvey. Before he came to Chester, he went from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., and he rescued a female slave that was a slave in D.C. Dressed her up as a male carriage driver, told everybody to stop him. She's my male carriage driver. Like basically he's her slave, she is his slave, or he in this situation. And she rode him to freedom, to Philadelphia. Then he let her go, and she went on her way. He then moved to Chester. He owned horses, and he used to race these horses. So at his house, he had a horse stable. On the horse stable, he says, he couldn't say it while he was living. It's a huge crime. Only super wealthy people can admit it. For example, we go back to our brother, Thomas Garrett. He was fined for helping slaves. In today's money, he was fined about $10,000. In today's money, it's like $300,000. And his attitude was, okay, see you next time if you catch me. He was dedicated, him and his family. So, this man, Elwood Harvey, Elwood Harvey, an unsung hero in Chester. He used to, when they came, the enslaved people escaped, he would put them in the top loft where the hay is for the horses and hide them there. Have his wife make the food. Again, we can't forget his wife. We can't forget Stephen Smith's wife. We can't forget these women that are involved in these things. So we need to get those names and pull them out. So anyway, his wife fixes the food. He didn't want his wife to take the food because she's making a crime. So he would take the food and feed them and bring them clothing. Why is this important? Why am I talking about this man and saying he's an unsung hero and talking about his barn? his barn is where the Chester City Hall is. And the second floor is where we actually saw freedom. And that is the seat of our government right now, the Elwood Harvey barn is occupied by our city government, and the second floor is where they sought safety, and that's where we make decisions for the city of Chester. So that needs to be acknowledged. I think it needs to be a plaque there, and from there on Market Street, straight out, we need a color line, some line painted to let people know that this was an African American route to freedom. And I think we should do a freedom run every Juneteenth. Right there, freedom run walk. Sorry, freedom run walk. I'm walking right about now because I got the side of so when I said freedom run, my hip twitched. But I'm like, no, I meant walk too. I meant walk. So, hopefully, I painted a picture for you of Chester and introduced to you some names and characters of different routes going from Chester to Media, different stations, conductors, and our beloved sisters, which I have to, with my beloved auntie and colleague, Twyla, dig into some of the information. It's hard to find. We had to be careful. But sometimes you can look in and see a hint. My brother that I just met today, Howard, he also gave me some document today. I didn't have a chance to read because I was trying to stay in the zone for today. Howard's sitting here, and I was trying to stay in the zone for today, so I'm going to look it over where we have Chester mentioned. But when we see Chester mentioned, or something about Chester, near Chester, we need to take a different look at it. Maybe something was going on. And there's more names of these organizations that popped up right out of slavery, and they were all now bold, right in Chester, right in downtown. They were blocks and blocks and blocks of nothing but black societies. Right over town, oh yeah, there was something going on. So hopefully the next time I stand before you, when I come here, I will have more details on who they were and what they did. My goal is to put this information in a book, and it definitely will be dedicated to Chester and its residents, past, present, and future. And hopefully we can put Chester on the map of the Underground Railroad. And and lastly, I can't forget, in Philadelphia there were two rich black rail car owners. And they were known for smuggling people of African descent to Philadelphia, but it was from York, Pennsylvania to to Philadelphia. I believe that train, one of their trains, or several of their trains, came through Chester. And we need to recognize that and note that. And one of the train owners, Stephen Smith again. Stephen Smith was the man. Train owner, build a church here, right in Freedom Square, a train that goes through Freedom Square, right here. So we have work to do, and we have the picture to paint. So this is basically the conclusion of my talk. Hopefully you see and remember what's going on here, and look forward to this becoming actually published, so we can see it and have it and read it ourselves. So now I would like to take any questions that you may have. And yes, sir.
Okay, I thank you for that presentation. Basically, when you think about it, there weren't anybody who weren't people who duplicated what William still did. He kept very detailed records of all the people and hid them, so that after the emancipation, he could publicize it. I would make a suggestion to you about your prospect of the book. Not that it's a bad idea, it's a great idea, but I kind of think you need to think about something else. A historical poster series. Freedom Square. Let's do Freedom Square in colors with some names on it, with places pointed out, and some sketches of what those look like. You know, everybody's gonna buy that.
Yes, sir.
And they're gonna keep it, and they're gonna be able to use it in schools and programs that people have it framed, in their homes.
Yes, sir.
I mean, you're doing the research,
Yes, sir.
so
I definitely agree with that because I'm a visual person. So my maps are here, but I didn't break this out, and I've been editing the maps to make a poster, a thing like that, because I've seen some that were great, that kept me with the idea, and I know it's hard to see from there, but I just want to say that, show you so that you realize that I agree. So some of these maps of Old Chester that I've been looking at and trying to mark up for these locations so we can actually see it. I know that I've been rolling through this a lot of information, and I understand that, and I thank you for your patience. But yes, sir, that visual pictorial, I plan to bring that and show that here. But I lost my flash drive, so I tried to bring my computer, and then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna flow. So thank you for that, sir, and definitely that's one of the things up in the works. Yes, sir.
I have about 5 puzzle pieces to fill in for you. I would start off with this document that I gave you. You might want to start with the second paragraph. It's all about Mr. Sharpless. Okay? Also, Robert Morris. So, in my research I was doing on the Darby Quakers, there's a connection there. And it'll take about 5 minutes to tell the story if people want to hear it. Basically, he was an enslaved person in Delaware that was brought up to be the best friend of the son of the slave owner.
Yes. I
Okay,
have that.
so what happened was that the slave owner passed away. The son, who apparently got into gambling, got in quite some debt. And he came home one day and he told Robert, "You need to run because the sheriff is coming in a couple of days to take all my belongings and sell them."
Yes.
So he first went to check, and he's like, "Well, where am I to go?" He
So
said,
we're
"Well,
gonna come to Chester.
tell him to come to Chester and look for Quakers."
That's right.
So he comes to Chester, and he couldn't find the Quaker. So somebody told him to go to Darby. So he goes to Darby, and where he ends up is a place that just got hit by a trolley. If you're following the news, the Bluebell Tavern. Okay, everybody remember that last week? Okay.
So yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, his story at that point
Right.
is documented, and I want to dig further into that. What his family was doing, what everybody was doing at the Union AME, because not only was he there, and then of course he didn't stay in Chester. He also moved on, but he was there, and so was Reverend Smith that they talked about in Sharon. They were both at that place, and I also think that Willie Brown, or with Peg Leg, was also operating out of there, although they list him as Chichester. So yes, I do have that narrative there, but my point is that those places built up Freedom Square.
Right.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Good to see you again, Yusef.
Good to see you too.
Steve Harvey.
That's Steve Harvey, that's right, no relation.
Not that Steve Harvey. Do you know the other connection that Dr. Harvey had with Mr. Still?
Depends.
He was the family physician for the Stills.
Yeah, he was, that's right.
And I don't know if you mentioned the female medical college, which
I did.
Elwood's helped start with 3 other Quaker doctors, and one of Still's daughters later graduated from the female medical college and became an early doctor, and probably the first black female doctor in the area, like around 1870 or 1880 or so.
And folks, just so you know, Steve Harvey is the descendant of Elwood Harvey that had the barn that had the slave. That's who we're talking about, the descendant of Elwood Harvey, and his name is Steve Harvey, no relation. I put that as his last name. Yeah, Steve Harvey, no relation. So thank you for coming out. I invited him to come out and be with us as well. We have a wealth of scholars around us, and I definitely thank and pull from those scholars. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyway, thank you all. Scholars, we'll make Twyla will be the last one.
Okay. Just to help connect, I've been doing research on the Tent Sisters, which generated a documentary. Hi, Miss Lisa, who's in the documentary, as well as doing research in Green Lawn Cemetery. And our young people, as well as ourselves, need to be able to connect the dots. Because in researching Green Lawn, Union Church Cemetery was moved, and it's in the middle of Green Lawn. When I began to research the Tent Sisters and their history, because they were, quote unquote, a secret society, you find out that they were established in the middle 1800s and supported the Underground Railroad. And so when you look at the locations of where the Underground Railroad, as is listed, were the hubs in Chester, it's oftentimes their meeting places very near or not too far away. So as we begin to move forward in learning all of this new information that's basically hidden from us, you have to begin to understand and make the connections. And so I thank you. If you'd like to know more about what I'm doing, because mine is on a website and I'm working at Green Lawn, and just very, very briefly, and I'm almost finished, the owners of Green Lawn passed and left no paperwork. And for the past 5 years, a small team and I have been documenting, and I see Jay Francis in the back. We have documented just under 2,000 names and found just over 200 veterans. So the efforts are growing, but the documentation is there. And we have a Civil War soldier and moving up through. And the Civil War soldier is Rothwell. And the Rothwell family is the oldest black documented family in Chester. So again, folks, we have history. We just have to discover it.
Yeah, he's my great grandfather. So thank you guys. Sorry to cut your questions short, but we have to start wrapping up. That's why